Mike, if you don't mind unmuting Michael Fairbrother. Everybody, I would like you to welcome him to our meeting. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Hey, Mike.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks again for taking the time. We're really excited to have you here. We have some veteran mead makers in here, and we have some aspiring ones as well, myself included. So we're eager to learn from you, and take it away.
Awesome. So for 25 years now, I've been home brewing, and for the last 10 years, commercial mead making. And let me give you some background. So how'd I get here? I started homebrewing beer because I love beer and wanted to figure out how to make it. And within the first month, I was at a Boston work processor meeting, and somebody offered me a sizer, and I was embarrassed because I didn't know what a sizer was. So I passed my glass over. And if you've ever seen a little baby try something it loves for the first time, my eyes popped right up, and I was like, wow, what the hell is this stuff? And he said, a sizer, apple mead. I'm like, well, what's mead? He said, a wine made from honey. I'm like, well, I was a beekeeper. What are you talking about? How do you make wine from honey? And he's like, well, it's the same as making any other wine. It's just you dilute it with water instead of trying to add more sugar content. And so the next day, I literally went home and I made 2 batches. And that was the start of a magical journey where I never thought I knew enough and always wanted to learn more. And we've sold, I think today I calculated as of June 30th, 1.8 million bottles of mead in the last 10 years. So we're sold in 30 states in this country, export to Australia, Japan, Hong Kong, Canada. During the pandemic, we launched our Braggot, which is our Hidden Moon Brewing Company, IPA with honey. It's probably more of a West Coast IPA style beer than New England style IPA. Not as hazy, not as protein rich, but really just a nice, clean, rich honey note, but not sweet. So when you make a beer with honey, you really need to understand that the honey is going to ferment dry. And so it's going to give you a very light body and presence. So how do you make the beer taste somewhat sweet? Is you modify your mash temperature by about 2 degrees. So you go from 154 to 156 degrees Fahrenheit. And that gives you a little bit more residual sugar or unfermentable sugars from the mash that really kind of tie in well with the malt and honey notes. But, I think of myself as this guy that barely knows what he's doing. But I've been flown around the world now, twice to Australia, once to Chile, Uruguay, Argentina, twice over to Belgium to talk and present about my meads. I've done collaborations with breweries all over the world for doing honey-based beers. I've taught at the National Honey Board Symposium to brewers. I've done collaborations with Smog City for the last, 5 years now, doing Russian Imperial braggots. And we're literally stuffing the mash tun so much that the grain is barely making it around the mash tun during each pass of the rakes. I can answer almost any question you ever thought of. Most of my meads are listed as the BJCP de facto standards to which all meads are judged against. So, my name's on the front cover of the BJCP mead style guidelines. I'm the only commercial meadery mead maker referenced in that guideline. So I've got a lot of friends in the homebrew world. I mean, Gordon Strong, Chris England, the list goes on and on. I've done collaborations with Jamil Zanichev from Heretic Brewing Company. So that's pretty much where my IPA that I'm brewing now is based off of, which is the recipe that Jamil and I came up with, which is pale malt based, honey malt. Then we do a real light Columbus hop addition during the boil. And then I'm doing a double dry hopped with Amarillo and lemon drop hops. So I think you guys can now get it in Rhode Island. We're distributed that way with Atlantic. Probably hard to find. They haven't bought a lot, but it's it's what I wanted for my first IPA to be commercially released. And we're in 30 states here in the United States, export to Australia, Japan, Hong Kong, Canada. I've taught at the National Honey Board. Sorry, I mentioned that already. So National Honey Board was for 3 years, and I've taught at the Robert Mondavi Institute at UC Davis for a few years. Got a lot of friends who are professional mead makers and amateur mead makers. If you want to learn how to make the best meads you can possibly make, you need to join the groups on Instagram and Facebook and such, like Modern Mead Makers that Carvin Wilson is putting together, Tom Repus or Laura Agostine from Louisville, who make phenomenal meads. If you ever get a chance to get a mead in front of me to judge, and I come back with you a 50-point score, that means I think it's liquid in a glass or art in a glass. And what I'm looking for when I judge a mead is the totality of the beverage, right? Which is, how are all the elements balanced? How are the flavors? How's the sweetness? How's the finish? Because if you think about, I've taught at the BJCP National Convention about mead and judging. You can't think about mead as what you perceive a mead should taste like, because most people have never tasted a mead and tasted a really, really, really good mead. And what you're looking for is, how do all the elements integrate? Because, like, if you were to eat a sausage at a restaurant, you don't try to think about one element of the contents of that sausage. You think about, how well does this whole thing taste with what I'm trying to enjoy? And so that's the totality of it. And it's easy to do. It's the easiest thing I can tell you. So before I went commercial, my last mead that I made as an amateur went from start of fermentation to entry into a competition at 3 months. It won Best of Show out of 353 entries at the New England Regional Homebrew Competition, which had entries from all over the United States and Canada in 3-month time frame. So how do you get there? So 25 years ago, when I was making mead for the first time, I was, just trying to create anything that would ferment, and I didn't understand the kinetics behind it all. So yeast needs assumable nitrogen. So grape wines have a lot of yeast, or YAN, yeast assumable nitrogen. Honey has pretty close to 0. So how do you make that up? So the staggered nutrient addition regime, which meadmaderight.com, which is made by Sergio. Sergio owns a Melavino Meadery down in New Jersey. He's got a calculator on there, and it'll calculate exactly from based on your starting gravity, how much nutrients you need to add, and give you the 4 additions. So the 4 additions are at 24 hours, 72 hours, and the other one's another 24 hours. Forgive me, I've been enjoying a few meads myself. But and then the last edition is essentially a week out from that first edition. So what you're trying to do by adding the yeast assumable nitrogen is keep the yeast very happy and healthy. So given that temperature control is critical, and each yeast that you might use is very different. I use Lavalin 71B. Lavalin 71B works extremely well at about a 68 degree Fahrenheit normal temperature. So by normal, I mean it can go down to 65 and it can come up to 71. So there's a 3 degree temperature shift on this. But the average temperature we're trying to ferment at is 68 degrees. And what we're trying to do is keep nitrogen in solution for the first 3 days. And what that's doing is giving your yeast, assuming there's some oxygen and nitrogen, a very stable environment to reproduce in. So you may start at about 1 gram per gallon. So a 5 gram packet of yeast for a 5 gallon batch of of mead, or in my case, when I'm making a 500-gallon batch of mead, it's 500 grams of yeast. And that's a little lighter than most of my contemporaries would suggest you need to use. You can definitely double that if you're a little bit concerned about how to get to where you want to get to. But we start, and I'm going to talk in bricks because bricks are, from a commercial level perspective, so much easier than trying to figure out starting gravity, ending gravity. So bricks is percent sugar. So if we start at 32 bricks and we bring it down to 2 bricks, we have 15% alcohol. So you take the starting minus the ending percentages, divide it in half. Half goes to CO2 production, half goes to alcohol production, and it gives me a very easy, instant way to know and track how my mead is progressing. Now, we just got a really high-tech tool to try to track our fermentations. It's precision fermentation technologies. So we're going to try this out. We're about to make our first 100-barrel batch of mead. So if you can imagine, 10 years ago, I met and talked with Jim Sipp, who was one of the brewers at Red Hook Brewing Company up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And Jim was trying to get rid of some extra equipment they had at the brewery, and they were 100-barrel fermenters. It's like, Mike, you could use these, right? I'm like, Jim, there's never going to be a day I need a 100-barrel fermenter. And this week we're going to crack our first 100-barrel batch. And you can see these, I don't know how to point. These tanks behind me, these fooders, those are each 100 barrels at a pop, and those are where we make our cider in. But the key thing about mead making is do it a lot. So one year I made 64 batches, each a half-gallon batch, just trying to figure out how honey, each varietal honey changes the flavor and ferments and tastes. So the darker the honey, I've learned the higher the mineral content. The higher the mineral content, the more time it might take to really become a delightful, enjoyable mead. We make one now that's with African blossom honey from Zambia, and it's jet black when we start. And it's got a really nice mocha maple flavor when we start, but at the finish, it's really astringently dry. And some people love it, some people hate it, but it took a couple of years to get to that flavor profile where we can sell it for $30 at $3.75 a bottle. But I've done fruit meads, traditional meads. 2017, we were named Best Brewery of New Hampshire, and that was back when we weren't even brewing a beer. That's because of you guys, American Homebrewers Association members, who said that my Russian Imperial get me distracted. My Sam Adams Utopias barrel aged mead was something pretty much to rave for. And this year we'll be releasing batch 10 of that. So it's 10 years in the barrel. So I can talk about just about anything you guys have in mind. I'm kind of winging it because I didn't know exactly what you wanted to talk to. But the meadmaderight.com website, I still go to and have my team go to this day to really look up the calculation for how much, and we use Go Firm O, which is, Fermado and Go Firm. So we rehydrate to the Scott Labs fermentation guidebook specs. So it's basically, I'm going to wing this and say it off the top of my head, but 2.2 times the amount of Go Firm to yeast, so about 1,000 grams Go Firm for the batches we're making. So if you're making a batch, a 5-gallon batch, you're using about 10 grams. And then once we get to the nutrients, we're splitting those over a 4-day period, and it's about a teaspoon for a 5-gallon batch size. I do not use diammonium phosphate. So diammonium phosphate is inorganic form of nutrient, and it's like crack to yeast. So the yeast gets real excited and goes real fast, but then they crash, and it smells like ammonia. Well, diammonium, ammonia phosphate. So once you add that to your batch, your must is going to smell really nasty. And I have some well-respected peers that do use that, and they swear by it. I've just found that by going the organic route and really not trying to rush, like we can finish a batch of mead right now. If I was to compare it to what you guys could do, which is a homebrew scale, it's about a 3-month window. So I can cheat because I have a really high-grade filter, and my filter can save me that last month of time. But for the most part, it's a 3-month start to finish process. And that'll get you a 14% mead. And if you want to make a sweeter mead than a drier mead, you start with more sugar up front. Now, it's kind of like being an artist. So every mead maker I know will tell you a different story. So they'll tell you you can back sweeten, you can stop fermentation, you can do all these other things. What I've chosen to do is learn what my yeast likes and how to work with it. So how we do that is, at 32 bricks, the mead will finish pretty close to semi-sweet to dry. If I want to make it a sweeter mead, I might bring it up to 34 bricks. So that 1 to 2% difference of sweetness will make the world of difference at the end of the game. Now, if you push 40%, you got pancake syrup at the end of the day. And you might want to put that in a bourbon barrel and let it age for 10 years. And then when you start selling it for $200 a bottle, give me a call, because that's what we're doing these days. So I'm going to open up to questions if you guys like. I'm not sure exactly what you want to hear, but I'm trying.
All right. So as usual, if you hit participants at the bottom, there's the raise hand button. You have a question, raise your hand. I will unmute you and you can ask your question. All right. I'll start with Patrick. I saw his first.
Thank you. So I guess my question is how you go about developing from a concept to an actual finished product. So say in one of your travels, you come across a fruit that isn't prominent in America. Say you come across some unique fruit in Australia or something like that, and you say, hey, this has a flavor profile I'd like to utilize in a mead. How do you create something for that and see it all the way through?
So Patrick, when I was 14, probably younger, I wanted to become a chef when I was a kid. And so I really had this thought and concept of how flavors developed. And then at 14, I started working in a restaurant and realized that cooking is really a very hot job. So, and as a very heavy-set man, it was not built for me. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. How am I going to work in this environment? So I chose to go to computer science because, it was air conditioned and everything was going to be comfortable for me. But what I never gave up on is this sense of flavor. And Garrett Oliver came out with this Brew Masters book. I don't remember exactly what it was called, but it talked about flavor hooks and how flavors and everything go together. And, if you were to hear me talk about how flavors work and think about flavors, so honey is an amazing bridge category flavor. So chefs can cook with honey because it will levitate a super spicy hot dish, or it'll work with a dessert, or it can work with savory meats and such. So the flavor combinations, like I literally think I'm at 180 commercially produced meads at this point in time, whether it be different honey and spices, honey and fruits, honey, fruit, and spices. it's ridiculous how many I've come up with, and it's all been about thinking about, in my mind, how they all go together. So I'm trying to describe to you how an artist paints, right? So I could never paint a Picasso painting to save my life, right? It's just not possible for me. But I can think in flavor, right? So I can think about flavor in almost a three-dimensional perspective. And what I'm trying to think about is how do these elements, with the elements I've tasted, work together. So today, for example, in my tasting room, we have a slushy machine, and we have I get to pick the meads every week to what we're going to freeze and put in the slushy machine. So this week we have a peach, we have a cherry, and I've got this IPA that I made. It has a nice lemony drop flavor to it, and I was thinking, well, would peach frozen mead, on top of it float work? And my honest answer is, I don't think so. But I tried it, and I tried it because I was curious. But I was curious because I thought the lemon and the peach might work, but the mead's really sweet, and the IPA is not sweet. And so the resulting combination was interesting. Like I could enjoy it, but it wasn't something I said, okay, this is amazing. And when I make a mead and I'm trying to sell mead to the general public, I gotta believe it's amazing. I gotta, we sell our meads for, and we're not even the highest priced meads in the market anymore. But 10 years ago, when I was doing my research into the mead market, it was, $15 a bottle was the high end price point, and that was so $30 for a 750 milliliter bottle, or 15 for 375 like we sell, was like unheard of. And now you can find Superstition or Shrams, and $40 to $50 for Shrams, up to $100 a bottle, same size for Superstition. And it's really, you got to believe in your own product and make that work. And for us at Moonlight, we're trying to satisfy a national, if not international, market. So when I do a small experimental batch, like I've got some passion fruit and lychee fruit and other stuff coming in, those will go out to my Lunar Society members, but for the most part, the general public will never see that. So I can play around with small test batches, but for the most part, when I'm making a batch, it's heart and soul and just go. And I've had some colossal fuck ups as a homemade maker. I made a mint chocolate mead once, and I still have bottles, and that's 13 years ago. So I would say be brave as a home mead maker and think about what you can do and what scale you're willing to risk, because honey is expensive. But you can really find and learn. So, I mean, I've told people this for 30 some odd years, which is I was happy I was never a doctor, because if I was a doctor, I'd have a stack of dead patients, because I'm not afraid to take that kind of risk. But I tell my wife, but that's the kind of thing that I've really kind of built my passion around, which is I'm not trying to make money. I'm trying to make the best mead the world has ever seen. And I can tell you, next month, National Honey Month, pay attention to the Kurt's Apple Pie accolades that come out from the National Honey Board. I can't give a lot more into it, but I wish I could.
All right, next question will be from Eddie. Eddie, you're unmuted.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for being here. During your presentation, you were saying that you try to use organic nutrients. what exactly is it that you would use? I've used potassium metabisulfite. Is that organic? I have no idea what an organic nutrient is in that.
Yeah, so nutrients are nitrogen. So potassium metabisulfites are more of a finishing salt for stopping fermentation. So we're certified organic. We're the only certified organic meadery in the country. We have 2 of our meads that are certified organic. So if you were to look up Fermade O, which is O for organic, versus Fermade S, Fermade K, I guess is what we used to use for kosher. But Fermade O is an organic form of nitrogen. So what you're trying to find when you're adding your nutrients is nitrogen, which the yeast needs to bind to and grow or multiply. So if you were to skip the nutrient phase, you're probably looking at a 1 year to year and a half start to finish fermentation time frame. But if you provide the nutrients the yeast needs to do its job and keep the temperature right, you really can get it to a 3-month time frame. And it's really got to do with how do you grow that yeast and keep it happy. So we never repitch yeast, even though I've grown that yeast over the course of the fermentation cycle. We're looking at a 2-month window, and 2-month window compared to brewers is like a lifetime. And compared to wineries, it's still pretty long. So yeast with mead in general, and I'm using the term mead in the most general sense that you guys might use it, which is anything fermented with a primarily source of honey, not versus the United States government, which limits the definition of mead to only honey-based fermentables, no fruits or spices added. It's game-changing. So Kurt Stock, way back in the day, he's from Minnesota. He had some recipes, and he won the Best of Show. Or there's some incredible mead makers that I know, home mead makers. And, you know, these guys just really dialed in the game of how do they make a consistently spectacular beverage. And, you know, I mentioned 3 names of home mead makers, and there's way more. I mean, there's so many more, and most of these guys now, or some of the guys I would think of, are now commercial. You know, there's a lot of science behind how you got to go from, hey, I was winning all these competitions, to how do I go commercial. And you know, even Jason Phelps, him and I have been friends for, I think, well over 10 years, and you know, he's now got a meadery 5 miles down the road from my facility. You know, I think of him as a friend and colleague, and what's important to me is not trying to be the #1 guy in the world, but trying to be a great person in the world. And when I ran the American Meadmaker Association, my job was to figure out how we make this long term. I mean, I've traveled as much as 100,000 miles a year around the country trying to teach people about mead. And most people don't have any clue what it is. And, you know, they're like, well, what's this meat? I'm like, no, you don't want to make meat. And if you can make meat, I don't want to have it. You know, I really want to, I want to do this thing that's right. And if I think about all the commercial meat makers I know, you know, it's this camaraderie and this sense of, you know, we don't know it all. You know, we're blazing down new paths. But I can tell you this: one day when I was at a winery association meeting, and the guy who had the largest winery in the state said, "Oh, I mistakenly got some of your mead in one of my glasses. And I got to tell you, it was pretty good." And I looked at him and I was like, "What a backhanded compliment." I'm like, really? That's the best thing you can say to me? And at this point in time, my company is the largest producing winery in the state of New Hampshire. And he told me I was just full of bravado and was never going to amount to much. But you know, what I've been good at is, you know, being honest and telling people what works and what doesn't work. I used to run Mead for Your Die. And, you know, I still like to go to homebrew competitions and judge. And Yeah, any time any of you guys need a question, shoot me an email, fairbrother@moonlightmeadery.com, and I'd be happy to help.
Right. Hey, Josh, I see you're next. Josh.
Hey, Michael, how you doing?
I'm great, thank you.
Just to start off, let you know I grew up in your backyard. I grew up over on Beaver Lake in Derry.
Yeah, I know the area.
Yeah. So my simple question really is, I'm very unfamiliar with meads. Had a few, think I like the flavor, but really kind of uncertain about what I'm getting into. Which one of your meads would you recommend that I taste to make it be that like wow moment and say like, wow, this is what mead can be, and this is going to get me into like drinking and trying it and maybe wanting to make it myself?
That's not an easy question. I would say No Need to Argue, which is my cranberry mead, named after the Cranberries album, is where I'd suggest to start. So it's a semi-sweet 14%er. The best to show last year at the International San Diego Beer, Mead, and Cider Competition. And it has all the elements. And before that one I produced, I would have said Kurt's Apple Pie, which is, was my historically bestseller, but the No Need to Argue is definitely outpaced it. The one I started my company with is called Desire, and that's a blackcurrant, blueberry, black cherry mead, and that's based off of Kurt Stock's recipe. So one of the greatest things I'm good at is tasting something that somebody else makes and trying to figure out how to make it better. So my best friend Kurt, who's created this apple pie mead back in 1996, he brought me a bottle one day, and we were trying to brew a porter. And I was having a real tough go with the brewery homebrew system, because we'd overboiled it, caramelized the malt, and it's cascading over the side of the brew kettle. And so he's trying to present me this mead that he wanted me to try. And I'm like, Kurt, I can't try it right now. We've screwed the pooch here. The beer's burnt. I'm not sure this thing's gonna work out. And but he leaves me the bottle, and a year goes by, and I see this bottle sitting in the basement of my house, and I'm looking at it, going, what the hell is this, right? So you guys gotta appreciate what kind of beer geek I am. My license plate on my truck was brewer for, I haven't had it for 10 years, but I had it for 10 years before it now. So for 20 years, I had a homebrew license plate that said brewer, and a brewery built into the basement of my house with condensate hood and temperature controlled conical fermenters, and this tippy dump system from Beer, More Beer. And here my best friend is trying to leave me this bottle of mead, and I didn't know what to think about it. And so I pulled the cork out in 1997, and I smell the bottle, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. It smelled just like my grandmother's apple pie. And I'm like, I pour it into a glass, and I'm like, damn it. I mean, it's sweet and it's dessert. Like, there were 3 ingredients he used. So, 4. So he had vanilla, cinnamon, apple, and honey. And it tasted like a fresh apple pie with like hints of nutmeg and all this other stuff. But most brewers, when they're making a pumpkin beer, they overdose the spices, and so it becomes this collision in your head of, you're close, but you just killed me with too much. And this was just the simplest pieces in your brain, just connected the dots and drew places where it didn't exist in the flavors. And I called him up the next day, and I said, Kurt, I need another bottle. He says, no. I said, buddy, I'll give you $100 for 1 bottle. Now, because when I drank the bottle he gave me, it was a 750 milliliter bottle, 16% alcohol. I passed out. So the next day is when I called him back, and he said, no, I don't have any more. I'm like, yeah, you wouldn't give me a last bottle. Come on, give me another bottle. He's like, Michael. He says, I loved it and I drank it. And I said, oh, buddy, you got to make another one. He goes, yeah, I'll make some more. Well, I've known Kurt since 1982. He taught me how to bag groceries at Market Basket way back in the day. And I'm like, so in 2010, 2010, when I quit my day job, Kurt came over to the house with a bottle of mead that I made back in 1996. It was a dot matrix printer label stuck to the bottle with milk. And I'm looking at this bottle and going, wow, where have you kept this for so long? He said, Michael, I always knew you were going to make the go commercial. I wanted to hang on to this till you did. He said, if I could do anything for you and your company, you tell me. I looked him straight in the eye and said, I'll take that apple pie recipe. But he gave it to me. So while Kurt's apple pie historically has been Moonlight Meadery's #1 bestseller, Desire was before his came onto the market, and No Need to Argue is now our bestseller. So any one of those three is a pretty solid bet. But you know, we don't sell 1.8 million bottles with having a lot of clunkers in the field. And we are open for outdoor tastings, so if you want to come up and visit, we'd love to see you guys.
Looks like we have 2 more hands right now there, Michael. You okay? Okay, a couple more questions?
Yeah. Keep going.
All right. Alex, you're next.
Oh, all right, great. Hey, Michael, to say what everybody else has, thank you so much for doing this. I've been a big fan of Moonlight for a few years now. Everybody hear me?
Yeah, which one you drinking?
Yeah, so actually I just moved from Providence to Richmond, Virginia, and they sell Moonlight in my local store. So I picked a bottle of Desire, which I love black currants. And to answer Josh's question, if you like a fruited mead, Josh, this is the one to go with. Black currant, cherry and raspberry, or just black currant and cherry?
Black currant, cherry, and blackberry.
It's blueberries.
Blueberries, yeah, sorry.
It's delicious. But, yeah, learned a ton just from, listening to a lot of your podcasts and stuff that you've done with other brewing podcasts. But I guess this is less of a mead or a brewery question and more of the market question. Again, ignoring COVID and what that's going to do to the market. What is your thought on how to make mead more accessible to the regular consumer? I love mead. I love mead. Mead can also be $10, $15, $25 a bottle, even at your local package store. So for someone that hasn't drank mead, it's going to be like, well, I don't want to spend $15 that bottle. Now, we know why it's so expensive, because money's expensive. Honey is expensive compared to some of the other ingredients. But even at a bar, you have cider on tap. You have these bottled ciders, but you never see mead even at a high-end craft beer bar.
Well, you haven't hit the right craft beer bar yet. So
Fair.
The further I get away from New Hampshire, the more my mead sells in bars. So last year was the first time we ever sold a sixtel, the 20 liters of mead, into a bar for $1,000. You said, wow. I said, wow, because, I get about a little more than half of that. So about $600 came to me. The distributor got $1,000, and the bar took that mead and retailed it for $11,000. So they took 5 gallons and made $11,000. So they were selling at $20 an ounce. Now, how does that come about? Well, I put a lot of meat away in a long time in barrels. So I'm being cautious and believing in myself in that this can happen. So my foundation has been that let people taste it, and we will sell, and we will sell a lot. And so, if you were to look maybe half a year ago, I had 42,000 or so untapped check-ins, and we're now somewhere around 50, 57, 50, somewhere around there, 57,000. So how does that grow at 12,000 people a year? It's because people like you are tasting it and saying, "Whoa, you might want to try this." Now, we sell our Utopian at $150 a bottle. Now, one might ask, well, what makes a mead worth $150 or $10, $15 an ounce? Well, I used to run the Sam Adams homebrew competition for several years. And, we've aged this mead in these barrels for 10 years now. I can tell you that year 10 comes out this December. It'll probably retail for $250 a bottle. And nobody has created a mead that they sell in the marketplace that is aged for 10 years in a Sam Adams Utopias barrel. The flavors are to the point where I have legally obligated restrictions on what I can say about the similarities that might exist in this beverage from a very well-known brewery. But I can tell you that former brewers who have worked at this brewery, who now work at distillers, have been reaching out to me to get swapped barrels. So I will pull mead out of the barrel, send the barrels to them. They will make a bourbon or a rye in these barrels and then sell those and put my name on the barrel or on the bottle. You have to believe, and you have to believe like nobody else thinks possible. So, what I've been able to do and what I really kind of set my foot forward on, and why I didn't start a brewery 10 years ago, is because I thought there was a lot of good breweries in 2010, and I didn't see how I could ever become above the fray, right? How do you become good in a crowded field of grape, right? It's pretty hard. But I didn't see a lot of really great meaderies, and I was winning time and time again all these medals, and I thought maybe there's an opportunity to do what somebody has never done before. And if you think about Smart Food Popcorn back in 1987, their business model was to give every kid in college a free bag of popcorn. Now, I went to college in 87, and the popcorn that was generally available was this disgusting, nasty Dayglow orange popcorn that nobody ate, or your aunt gave you a bucket for Christmas and you're like, what did I do to her, right? So it's this kind of this thing in life that you really kind of grew up. But what they understood was if you make something really great and give it to people, get out of the way. And so what I've really kind of set the tone for my company and my staff, because I was making way more money as a software engineer or executive in a software company, which is think of money to a company as gasoline to a car. You don't buy a car to burn gasoline. You buy gasoline to take your car where you want to go. So if money to my company is helping me drive my company to where I want to go, this is and not what I'm in business for, which is to acquire more money. This is an opportunity. And the challenge for me is I never really was a very studious student. Went to go to business school or anything. So I didn't realize how much growth was going to cost. But I can tell you with 30 states of distribution and international distribution, when everybody tells you the sky's the limit, what they don't tell you is the trees get in the way. So you got to clear the tree line to get above that hurt level. And we're just at the tree level. And for the first year, and I think it's 5 years now, we're actually profitable, even with the COVID. So, I'm trying to figure out, how do I buy the destination location for Moonlight Meadery? And on March 16th, we were looking at a 50-acre farm with 20,000 square feet of space that we're going to convert into the winery, brewery, cidery space with outdoor venue and, all this kind of stuff and orchards and all this kind of everything. But that same day, the calls from states shutting down started coming in, and we had 30 calls, and every single state shut down, and we had no more business. So I spent one whole month sitting in my tasting room by myself because I had to lay off every employee I had, including my son-in-law and my wife and all my staff. And what I was able to figure out is don't give up. Don't even think of it. Just hold tight. believe in what I've done and believe in you, the customer, and my fans, homebrew fans. Like, this whole reason why I started doing these Zoom calls is just, I needed to reach back out. I need to hear from somebody. People, you guys are, to me, I'm a lifetime AHA member. And when I went pro, they wanted me to give it up. And they're like, oh yeah, as a pro, you can't be a home mead maker or home HA member for life. And I'm like, what? I paid for this. This is going to my grave. You're not getting me out of this easy. And it's been amazingly spiritual year for me. I mean, I brought everybody back as soon as I could. We put a lot of money into inventory because I said, well, if the government's going to give me money to pay employees, I might as well put it towards something we can sell and make money with. And we're bulking at the seams right now, but we've been able to really kind of turn it around, and it's. So here's the simple answer. When people try what I make, they buy it. I've done festivals all over the world, and the most coolest thing for me personally out of the last 10 years was being invited to Belgium, to Oostleven, which is 6 miles away from West-Leven Monastery, where they make West-Leven, and pouring my mead, cider, and beer. And, see monks walking up with the robes and little socks and sandals and, trying my stuff. And I'm thinking of myself as a homebrewer, and I'm going, fuck it, I want to go drink. I mean, I was really having a good time. And the beer festivals in other countries aren't like here in the United States. The ones in Belgium run for 12 hours a day. And there was as much West-Leven as I could possibly want to drink at my fingertips with no cost at all. And, and it's, I only wish I was smarter and braver, younger to try again. And I would have done it 10 years before now. But, my wife's trying to talk me into retiring and setting things back. But I'm on fire and I'm dancing around the dance floor. This is what I meant to do.
Great. Next, we have Beckett. Beckett, I'm unmuting you all the way from Arizona.
Oh boy. So I have a super novice, simple question. So I tried to make my first mead, well, actually twice. I tried once and I had to let it cool and then add my yeast and then forgot. And then like a week later, I was like, wait a minute. So I had to dump that. And then, so that totally sucked. Then the next time I did it, everything went well. I did it in December. And then in June, I was taking off the fermenter because I had to move to Arizona. And I tried it and it tasted like alcohol, like really, really strong. So I was like, oh no, what did I do? Maybe it just needs more time. So I put it in a keg just because I had to transport it to my mom's house because I left. I wasn't going to bring it cross country with me. And I don't know at this point, is it still going to be viable? Like, is it going to age sitting in a keg? And also, like, if it gets a leak by any chance, is it ruined? I don't know what I did wrong.
So I think it's really hard to screw up a mead, but I've had really bad mead. So I maybe it's got to do with how I take care of attention to detail. But so high fusel notes is because of temperature during fermentation. So if your yeast gets too warm, so think of it as like our little racetrack. The warmer it gets, the faster the yeast goes. The faster the yeast goes, the more fusels it creates. So if you want to create a mead that's really smooth and low in the perceptual low alcohol, that's where that lower mid upper 60-degree temperature for like Lavalan 71B. So each yeast has what is considered its sweet spot, like where it likes to ferment. So you can look this kind of information up. Scott Laboratories has a really nice handbook for different types of yeast and different fermentation temperatures they like. Also, what kind of yeast assumable nitrogen load they like to have. So all that goes into effect. Now, the meads that I was making 25 years ago were just what you were talking about. So I made this pineapple mead. So I'm at this Boston Wort Processor meeting, and I was given a sizer, so apple and honey mead. I go home thinking, okay, I like apple, but I love pineapple, so I'm going to make a pineapple mead. Now, I got pineapple juice dolls, pineapple juice from the local grocery store, honey, which I got from the local beekeepers, and crushed pineapple and all this kind of stuff, and I made a 5-gallon batch. Put everything together. Now, I didn't have enough airlocks because I had a couple beers going, I had this traditional mead, and I had this pineapple mead going. So I took a stopper, and I had a little hose going from the top of the stopper into the little half-gallon growler, right? So I'm trying to be creative, how to figure out how to make this all work. Well, the chunks of pineapple clogged up that blow-off tube, and it exploded all over the kitchen. Like chunks of pineapple on my ceiling, right? Like this most tremendous mess you ever saw possible. Now, what I failed to understand back then was sweetness and acidity are hand-in-hand items. So pineapple juice tastes really nice because it's really sharp with acidity, but really sweet from the sugar of the pineapple. So if that were to ferment down, you have all this sharp acidity, but no sweetness. So that's where I was really learned how to figure out balance. Now, I let this mead age for, I'm going to say 5 years, but maybe 3 to 4 years, 5 years possible, but in a keg. So this mead was in my basement, out of the way, because my gospel speaker back then was Charlie Papazian, and his book said, "Relax, have a homebrew, let this thing, let it go." So I let it go. I had all these kegs, and I think I had close to 50 kegs at one point. So, like I said, I'm a beer nut, and so I let this keg sit. My homebrew club's having a meeting, and I'm hosting it, and there was Phil Sides, who's I don't think he writes still for Yankee Brew News or Mid-Atlantic Brew News, but he's really into the homebrewing scene as well, and professional beer judge, and really great friend. And so my first day meeting him, and he comes to my house and he's like, mead, I love mead. And I'm trying to impress this guy, right? So I go running down to the basement of my house. I've got a 1-gallon pitcher, and I pour mead off of this 5-gallon keg. I come running back upstairs to share it with my homebrew friends. And I hadn't tried this in probably at least 2 years. And it had darkened a little bit. So, pineapple's really light color. And mead, as it oxidizes, will tend to brown a little bit. But what I could smell as I'm pouring it into this pitcher was this amazing pineapple aroma. And I was like, oh, God, I hope this is going to work. And I bring it upstairs, and I start pouring glasses, and people were looking at me, staring at me, going, what is this? It tasted like fresh pineapple juice, so the acidity had gone from this real low level to this really kind of more softer, neutral flavor over time. And that's when I really got to appreciate how time can change the perception and the sweetness and everything about the mead. And the oldest mead I've had to date was 60 years old. Like literally, I'm at a table in Boulder, Colorado. These guys from Poland are bringing, their grandfather made this mead, and it was in a carboy, and they brought it over. They wanted to get people's perspective, and I happened to be lucky enough to be at the table. And as I see these guys pull this mead, they describe it, I'm taking every bottle I got of mine and putting it on the floor because I don't want anybody to taste anything I've made compared to a 60-year-old mead. And it was spectacular, like literally spectacular. Like you can't even think to describe how things can get better when it's great. It was way past great, like so far past great. So my advice to you on your mead that's a little hot, I don't want to say hot fusel, is give it time. And if time is not always an option, what you could do is make another mead that's maybe a little softer and a little gentler and blend the two. So I tend to blend as I need to. Like if I'm making a mead that's too sweet and I want it to get it drier, I'll blend after fermentation. So I don't typically add honey post fermentation because what I'm afraid of is that raw honey characteristic that might come through. And I caveat that, but I've tasted so many more amateur meads now that have been made with ways that I recommend not doing it, that I've given up with some of my recommendations. But if you're in Arizona, Carvin Wilson's out that way, and he Modern Mead Makers on Facebook, I think. Send me a text or whatever, and I can point you at the right Facebook page. So Carvin owns a software company, and he's probably, he won Mead Maker of the Year, I think, last year. He's prolific, and he's a great person, great resource, and there's a lot. I used to distribute in Arizona. It's been a number of years since we have. We are trying to figure out a solution to come back, but it's not looking very easy for us. But I think we can ship to that area.
Next up, Timbo.
Hey, Michael.
Hey,
Thanks again for doing this. So earlier today, we were all talking on our Slack channel because I'm sort of a newbie into drinking mead. Drank it before, but never really got into it. And I had a super simple question, and everybody had sort of an answer, but there's not really anything definitive. And seeing as I'm drinking one of yours right now, I figured I'd ask you, what's your preferred serving temperature for some of your meads?
It really depends on time of year. So like today when it's ungodly hot here in New Hampshire, frozen doesn't suck at all. But normally I like it at closer to cellar temperature. But like when I've done tastings in Arizona, it's pretty much ice cold. So what happens when you refrigerate or chill the mead, honey takes a step back. Any other fruits or spices take a little more predominant flavor profile. So like my peach mead as a frozen slushy, it's goddamn heaven. It's really what it is. I mean, it's so ice cold that the straw will freeze and you get an ice block inside of it. And I was a little hesitant about buying this slushy machine to put my mead on because I believe mead is a work of art, and I'm like, why are we going to do this to my works of art, type of concept. And because, I've had sales guys that have wanted me to blend it with vodka or tequila or whatever at bars, and, they've signed me up to do tastings at bars where they're blending everything I make with something else, and I'm like, this is not what my fans want. What are you doing? We're charging money for people to come in and have you take what I'm doing as an art form and blending it with some other crap, and I'm supposed to sit back and trying to be a kinder, gentler mead maker. I've learned to say okay, but sometimes I push back. So I really don't recommend blending mead with other distilled spirits in general. But I've had it close to warm, not quite mulled, because you have to be careful when you're trying to add heat, because it only takes 140 degrees for that alcohol to vaporize, and then you've taken all that hard work I've worked so hard to do and just thrown it out the window. So I don't suggest mulled. I like it somewhere between room and slightly chilled. If you were to come to our tasting room, almost every mead we have is at, room temperature. And that's so you get a better flavor profile. And the nice thing about serving mead chilled is you can always let it warm up. Whereas you can't flip that and say, okay, we start warm and then we're a little colder. And the only way to do that is add ice cubes, and that changes the flavor profile 100%.
Rich, I got Rich next. Do I have you on mute? There we go.
Yes, you do. For better or for worse. So I had a question about fermentation, specifically about yeast. Do you have a specific the yeast that you recommend for fermenting mead? Can you use almost any alcohol tolerant yeast that you want, as long as you stick to the nutrient additions guidelines? Could you use like a high alcohol tolerant beer yeast? And for my own nerdy, I'm packing on questions on questions on questions, but could you use the yeast and microflora that are present in honey to kind of create your own house culture?
Great series of questions.
We're gonna be here for a while.
As a home brewer, I use Lavalin 47D almost exclusively. When I went commercial, I switched to 71B. That is the yeast I use for everything we ferment, and that includes ciders. The beer is using White Labs American Ale yeast, but for anything that we're fermenting in my shop, it's 71B, and the reason being is it's the canvas to which I create the flavors on. So if you think of my water supply can change based on time of year. My honey can change based on the flowers the honey's visiting. Fruit, blueberries from Michigan taste nothing like blueberries from Maine. So all the fruit and or spices can possibly change. So the only constant I have is my yeast. So that's why I've stuck to one style of yeast. Now, as a home mead maker spanning 25 years, I can tell you I've used Fleischmann's yeast for making bread. I can tell you I've used an unmixed version. So we basically left the honey at the bottom of the fermenter, and we let the yeast stir the honey into fermentation. And I can tell you I've seen as much as 1/8 of an inch degree of honey being mixed into solution over a 24-hour period. I'd be careful about trying to use wild microflora. So honey is really antimicrobial, right? So honey is it's very low in moisture content. And so any kind of wild bacteria or yeast that get onto the honey wicks the water out of the yeast or microflora, and it kills it. So there's not a lot of wild critters that you can use from honey. Also, honey has a has this ability to buffer the pH. So if you were to try to manage the pH of your must, the honey will give you that number, and when you come back 24 hours and check it again, it's back to the original number. So there's some properties there that do not lend itself to, let's say, wild fermentation. We do have a wild mead that's called Curiosity, and we made that in Allagash Curio barrels that we intentionally inoculated with Lactobacillus and Brettanomyces. And the pH of honey is pretty low, so it's hard, if not difficult, to make a wildly spontaneous fermented beverage from honey, because it doesn't have exactly what you'd want. So malt, for example, you're dealing with different pH levels, and it has a lot of softer pH levels, so it can go wild really quickly. Whereas honey is low. Like we have a mead that finished at 2.9 pH, which is fairly acidic, and that's because of the black currants that we used. And the way we make that drinkable is we give pretty high residual sugar, but the way it presents to customers is dry, because three things control that perception: the actual pH, the residual sugar, and the alcohol level. Hope that helped. Awesome.
All right. Alex has his hand up again. Alex.
All right, so a couple really quick questions and a random comment. So speaking of these slushy meads, so in Richmond, there's a meadery called Blackheath Meadery.
Yeah, no.
it there yet, but I just saw on their Instagram where they got a slushy machine, and they're serving slushy meads now.
Yeah, they're good folks. So
Yeah.
we've my brother is in the restaurant industry equipment supplying business, and with COVID, I was trying to figure out, what the hell am I going to do? Really, I mean, we had to shut down all tours. Half my business model was my tours and tastings, and we used to spend, walking through each customer through each mead to explain, because it's not like you sit down and go, oh, I got a porter, I got an IPA, and I got a stout, and I know what those are. I mean, what's first dance? What's last apple, right? So we there was no concept for our customers to think about how to frame this in mind. And so the slushy machine idea was kind of this harebrained scheme of, like, I'd heard about a few meaderies or wineries doing it. And I can tell you we sold 150 in the first month, which is paid for the machine, which is so crazy that I'll probably have a bank of them by next summer, because it's just, I was afraid the mead wasn't going to taste as good or it was going to freeze to rock solid. But with our meads being at 14%, the sweeter the mead, the better it seems to work. Like, we've tried some that were not like super sweet and more semi-dry, and it's just really tart. But like the Smitten, which is my peach, or my Entice, my raspberry, tastes as cherry. It really comes across amazing. It floats really nice. And the one I made today with a beer, I was afraid it was going to kind of go into the beer and just dissolve and be a mesh. But it froze this ice block on the top of the beer. And I was like, the foam of the beer froze. And I was like, damn. I mean, from an aesthetic point of view, I was just like, I didn't expect that. And I was like, do I drink it with a straw? Do I try to sip it off the side? I'm like, and I'd probably have to do like an orange-based mead, or maybe something a little more tropical to try with an IPA, maybe a pineapple, and see how that might work. The peach definitely wasn't a slam dunk, but I'm willing to own my mistakes.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to trying it. And then a quick question from my gallery with the Utopia's barrel mead. So, you're going to be selling those bottles. Is there any chance you'll also have those bottles in the tasting room for, like, an elevated price for a single tasting if we visit the meadery?
We do. So we still have cellared versions. So with COVID, I've pulled out so we've released 9 batches of Utopian so far. And so we have usually one bottle available for tasting. And we try to limit the max bottles you can buy. We had one lady come in and she bought 6, and I was, I was happy. But being like, I don't have that many. So, it's kind of a catch-22, but, and we don't get any more barrels. Part of that hand tying was to not give us any more future access to these barrels that make it taste like something very simple.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to tasting it. And then last quick question I have, and quit dominating. So, when's the mead seltzer going to come out? The hard mead seltzer.
I joked about this. So I created this Facebook ad called White Hive to spin off of White Claw. And I had this little beehive, because beehives are white. And I'm like, we're going to do a natural honey seltzer, and it would be called the Natural Buzz type of thing. So we actually have one. The last 13 cases are heading to Virginia. I think they shipped out today. So it's called, that one's called Buzz. Raz what she said. So it's a raspberry and honey with water, right? So seltzer is nothing more than usually fruit and sugar fermented. So my session meads are there. Now, a few meaderies took exception to my picking on the category as a viable option. So, I wasn't trying to pick on anybody. I was just trying to be funny, because I said White Claw, White Hive. this is just my personality and my view of how crazy the world is, and so we don't call it a seltzer, we call it our session mead. But and it's funny, every can that we produce is gluten-free, and every customer calls up, is there any malt in this? I'm like, no, that was honey, raspberry, and water. That's all that was taken to make it. So I'm not going to chase the trends. I mean, if I wanted to do that, I probably would have started a brewery 10 years ago instead of one during the pandemic. But Hidden Moon Brewing Company is my beer brand name, and Moonlight Meadery, as you guys all know, is my mead brand name.
Excellent. And if you have to go or something, just let us know. But a couple more hands keep popping up. So.
No, I'm good. So you guys don't appreciate how much I miss contact with the world. I mean, I come home and I drink. So this is the most sober I've probably been in a few weeks.
All right. Next we have Eric. Eric, you're up.
All right. I think I got it now. So my experience with mead has been very limited, both in drinking it, and I haven't made it at all. But you have spoken about your cider in the cidery, especially when you were, prior to pandemic, you were kind of looking at that. I've done a couple ciders. My favorite was a mulled kind of winter blend, and I most recently did a pineapple cider. I don't really have a specific question necessarily, but I'd like to kind of get your feedback on what might differ your process with cider versus mead, and just any things you'd like to talk about, really.
Yeah, so cider for me is really an interesting dichotomy of challenges, right? So apple juice is pretty, not super high, but pretty low in sugar content compared to the honey side of the business. So how do I make a cider that I can put in? I'm going to figure this out eventually. One of these fooders behind me and let it age, and we sanitize these fooders with rye whiskey. So if I'm putting 3,100 gallons of cider in one of these barrels and I want it to age for 5 to 6 months, how do I get it to keep from getting bad or moldy or funky or just off? And what I paid attention to as a young fermenter was, when breweries want to make a light beer, they usually make it really strong. And what they'll do is that gives them two advantages. So one, when the yeast is fermenting, you're getting a higher, richer mouthfeel. And two, you can take your tank size and double them, right? So the cider you see in the tanks behind me, that's at 13.5% alcohol. So I can make 400 barrels at a time, really by making 200 barrels at a time. And 200 barrels is certainly a lot of cider, 6,100 or 6,200 gallons. But to make that into 12,400 gallons just by adding water isn't a really bad model for us. And what happens is I get all that higher alcohol is a preservative. So the yeast doesn't, sorry, I'm running low on power. Hopefully I don't die on you guys. But so the yeast doesn't keep fermenting and doing more damage, but the yeast, the alcohol preserves the cider until I'm ready, and then I get that really rich body and flavor. So we filter into the tank before we're done, and then we filter from the tank before we put it into the bright tank to make our 6.5% cider. And like I said, we sanitize with this rye whiskey that cost me about $100+ a gallon as a sanitizer that we spray inside the oak before we use it.
Next up, Patrick. Patrick, what's your question?
So I'm down to about 5% battery, so I might have to bail soon.
Oh, yeah, I'll ask you real quick. So I might have missed this if you already discussed it, in which case just tell me I did and do what you got to do. But one, it's a two-part question. One, how in the hell did you get a goddamn Utopias barrel? And two, how many more uses do you think you'll get out of it before it's no longer a viable barrel?
So I didn't get one Utopias barrel. I got 20. So
I reiterate, how in the good God's name did you get 20 goddamn barrels?
So I used to run the Boston Long Shot competition and the Sam Adams Patriot Homebrew competition for Boston Beer Company. So I have a lot of really good friends at Boston Beer Company. And in January 2011, I sent Jennifer Glanville an email and asked if I could get one barrel. And she said, Michael, the dock is full. Come help yourself. Because I said I wanted to kind of do a tip of the hat to Jim Cook. And, I really, I've got a signed autographed letter from Jim and my meadery for when I used to run his competitions. And the interesting thing for me was when they first approached me to run their competition, they didn't say, have I ever done it before? They said, can you do it? And I said, yes. And I finished to the minute I said we'd finish, and I had, I think, close to 300 judges, and it was 750 entries or something crazy like that. And they asked, well, how many of these had I ever run before? And I said, this was my first. And the guy's jaw dropped, and he looked at me and said, well, you didn't tell us that when we asked you. And I said, yeah, but you asked me if I could do it. And that's exactly what I did, right? So as an executive in a software company, I know how to delegate, and I know how to manage large software teams, right? So I had a software team in Russia, and I had one in Ohio and Texas. So I knew how to pay attention to the details, but the day of the event, I had nothing to do because it was all done beforehand. And, the key was to do the right thing and be honest and truthful with them. I worked with their marketing team to get permission to call it what I did. That got lost somewhere along the line, and we had to get that legally sorted out. But, I saved those emails, and we got that all legally sorted out. So, I've been in this game for 25 years as the ultimate beer geek. I've had a keg of Pliny the Elder on draft at my house. And I was thinking, just the other day, maybe now's the time to ask Vinny if I can get another keg, because, with all the bars closed, he might have a few extra kegs available. And I was like, but, I've, good personal friends with Mitch Steele, who now works part owner of New Realm down in Atlanta, but was head brewer at Stone Brewing Company. Jamil Zanichev and I have done a number of batches together. The beer I brewed with Red Hill Brewing Company in Australia went on to win the Great Australian Beer Spectacular. So that was a Russian Imperial Stout. If you guys have ever been to the National Homebrewers Conference meetings and seen me there pouring my Russian Imperial Stouts at, whether it be the Brewing Network events or, taking commando tables at club night or whatever. I've done this for pure passion, and I will never stop that passion for trying to share my joy and my love. My IPA should be available at Total Wines. I don't know if you got any down in Rhode Island, but it's nobody's going to stop me from having the time of my life. And I tend to break the rules and try to ask questions after the fact, because mostly I don't know what I'm doing, and people that don't think something's possible are never going to try. And so I try for everything I believe is possible, and everybody's told me it can't happen, and I've shown them how it can.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael, for being here.
Nice. Thank you, guys, ladies.
Yeah. We will be on this call hanging out, chatting, drinking for a while. So if you find yourself some power, you're welcome to come join us and hang out.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael, very much. We appreciate it a lot.
Cheers.
Cheers. All right. So, guys, with that, the meeting is officially adjourned. I got my gavel right here. Drink, hang out as long as you'd like.